We welcome you to this virtual leadership talk sponsored and supported by the Clergy and Lay Leadership Development Team of the Desert Southwest Conference of the United Methodist Church. We would like to let you know that our presenter now, Reverend Dr. Kristen Hansen, would you be accepting questions during your presentation, or would you prefer that after?
I will actually be having a dialogue, so there will be time that I'll be calling for questions during it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we do want to thank her for being here this evening with us and putting together her her presentation. And at this point in time, we will start our presentation. Thank you.
Okay. All right, well, I'm going to bring up my screen here for us. I am glad to bring this leadership talk to the group today. I'm basing this off of and using some stories from something called Friedman's Fables. And before I go any farther, I just wanted to ask really quickly, has anyone ever worked with family systems theory? Or are you familiar with Edwin Friedman or Murray Bowman and the work of family systems theory? Anybody done anything with that at all? Yeah. All right, great. Well, I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction, and what we're going to do today is actually walk through a few of these fables. I'm going to explain what family systems theory is. It's something that all of your pastors have. I'm going to take a stab here and say all of them have studied it and have been required to at least be aware of it, even if they're not using or accessing it today. And so we're going to actually walk through that today and do a little bit of work with that. So let me see. Okay, so this is me. This is my church. You'll see Desert Foothills. If you're wondering where that is, we're all the way down in Phoenix at the bottom, just north of the 202 on the south, just south of South Mountain. And you'll see our sanctuary or our building down there. You may have been to that before. And this is our stained glass that we have there in the sanctuary. I was let's see, the first church that I ever attended, I was born in Germany. And so I attended churches in Germany first on the military base that my dad was stationed on, and then moved here to the United States. This was not the first country that I visited, actually. I visited other countries before even coming to the US, but both my parents are from the US, and my dad was serving in the Army at the time. I went to a United Methodist church as a young child, but my parents both had been raised Church of God, Anderson, Indiana, which is a Wesleyan holiness. United Methodism is considered a Wesleyan, I can't think of the word right now, but they are sister denominations in a lot of their beliefs and Wesleyan based. And so I was originally ordained in the Church of God, Anderson, Indiana, and transferred into the United Methodist Church here in the Desert Southwest in 2017. So today we are going to go over Friedman's Fables and use that as kind of our work for today. Edwin Howard Friedman, he was an ordained rabbi, and he worked with family systems theory that had been started by Murray Bowman. And in that capacity, it was kind of like you could use it personally, but also you could use it in systems to understand how systems work together and why people interact in the way that they do. And so the book that we're going to be using today, he used this theory of family system theory to put a playful way of talking about ideas, talking about wisdom and some of the things that happen generally. I am currently in a group that talks about, as I am actually on and off throughout all of my ministry, that talks about family systems theory. We call ourselves the non-anxious leaders, and we are listening to this podcast by Jack Shatama, who is actually United Methodist, and he does a great job of this. So there's a good book right there. If you met my family, you'd understand. He put this together, and it does have a good basic understanding of family systems, and it's just how we're connected with each other and how that, all the dynamics that play into that. And not surprising, it also does play into every other reaction you have outside of your family, also in your churches, with your friends. So it's good stuff. Oh, Jeannie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that Jack Shatama was one of our presenters already.
I'm not surprised. Jack does some good work. He's been in to talk to our group too, and we appreciate him greatly. So that's a good place. That's a good place to start with this. This is another really good, if you're wanting to do some personal work on family systems theory in your own family of origin. This is a good book that's been recommended by Gina Campbell, who I've worked with quite a bit also over a couple of years. And another good resource. And I'm not going to go into all of the depths of family systems theory today. And if you're interested in doing some trainings and looking at, your own differentiation of self, your own anxieties, which family systems work with so well. The Bowen Center has some great things. Like, I was just reminded, I was on one of these on, I think it was Friday, and I was just reminded that for the pastor, a lot of us kind of feel pulled to lead from a charismatic place. But when we're talking about self-differentiation and leading as a non-anxious presence, it is a much healthier place to lead from self-differentiation, which doesn't lead with the charismatic leadership. It leads instead with a wholeness and a healthfulness that understands boundaries and dynamics between people. So it was a wonderful thing to be reminded of again. And that's a good place if you're interested in studying a little bit more and getting some training on family systems theory, if you want to go a little bit deeper. So what I'd like to do today, has anyone read Friedman's Fables before? Worked with that before? Okay, a little bit. All right. Well, what I'd like to do today is I'm going to read a story to you, and then I'll be asking some questions, and we'll be able to respond. So we're going to actually walk through doing this together. So I'm going to begin reading a story. So if you'd like to, you can get comfortable. Take a good deep breath, because we're going to do some good work together. This is a playful way to discuss some difficult things and to introduce some things that we may not want to talk about on our own. But when we do it this way, there's some wonderful peace and playfulness about it. So I'm going to read this story to you. And this is called The Friendly Forest. Once upon a time in the friendly forest, there lived a lamb who loved to graze and frolic about. One day, a tiger came to the forest and said to the animals, "I'd like to live among you." And they were delighted, for unlike some of the other forests, they had no tiger in their woods. The lamb, however, had some apprehensions, which, being a lamb, she sheepishly expressed to her friends. "But," said they, "don't worry. We'll talk to the tiger and explain that one of the conditions for living in this forest is that you must also let the other animals live in the forest." So the lamb went about her life as usual, but it wasn't long before the tiger began to growl and make threatening gestures and menacing motions. Each time the frightened lamb went to her friends and said, "It's very uncomfortable for me here in the forest." But her friends reassured her, "Don't worry. That's just the way tigers behave." Every day as she went about her life, the lamb tried to remember this advice, hoping that the tiger would find someone else to growl at. And it's probably correct to say that the tiger did not really spend all or even most of its time stalking the lamb. Still, the lamb found it increasingly difficult to remove the tiger from her thoughts. Sometimes she would just catch it out of the corner of her eye, but that seemed enough to disconcert her for the day, even if the cat were asleep. Now, soon, the lamb found that she was actually looking for the tiger. Sometimes days or even weeks went by in between its intrusive actions, yet somehow the tiger had succeeded in always being there. Eventually, the tiger's existence became a part of the lamb's existence. When she tried to explain this to her friends, however, they pointed out that no harm had really befallen her and that perhaps she was just being too sensitive. So the lamb again tried to put the tiger out of her mind. Why, she said to herself, should I let my relationship with just one member of the forest ruin my relationships with all the others? But every now and then, usually when she was least prepared, the tiger would give another start. Finally, the lamb couldn't take it anymore. She decided that much as she loved the forest and her friends, more than she had ever loved any forest or friends, the cost was too great. So she went to the other animals in the woods and said goodbye. Her friends would not hear of it. This is silly, they said. Nothing has happened. You're still in one piece. You must remember that a tiger is a tiger, they repeated. Surely this is the nicest forest in the world. We really like you so much. We would be very sad if you left. Though it must be admitted that several of the animals were wondering what the lamb might be doing to contribute to the tiger's aggressiveness. Then said two of the animals in the friendly forest, surely this whole thing can be worked out. We're all reasonable here. Stay calm. There is probably just some misunderstanding that can easily be resolved if we all sit down together and communicate. The lamb, however, had several misgivings about such a meeting. First of all, if her friends had explained away the tiger's behavior by saying it was simply a tiger's nature to behave that way, why did they now think that it was a result of communication, that the tiger would be able to change their nature? Second, thought the lamb, such meetings, while well-intentioned as they might be, usually try to resolve problems through compromise. Now, while the tiger might agree to growl less, and indeed might succeed in reducing some of its aggressive behavior, what would she, the lamb, be expected to give up in return? Be more accepting of the tiger's growling? There was something wrong, thought the lamb, with the notion that an agreement is equal if the invasive creature agrees to be less invasive and the invaded one agrees to tolerate some invasiveness. She tried to explain this to her friends, but being reasonable animals, they assured her that the important thing was to keep communicating. Perhaps the tiger didn't understand the ways of a lamb. Don't be so sheepish, they said. Speak up strongly when it does these things. Though one of the less subtle animals in the forest, more uncouth in expression and unconcerned about just who remained, was overheard to remark, I never heard of anything so ridiculous. If you want a lamb and a tiger to live in the same forest, you don't try to make them communicate. You cage the bloody tiger. So I'm going to stop sharing this for a moment. And I have some reflection questions for you. I want you to, for just a moment, I want you to think about the tiger and the lamb and where you've seen something like this before. Is there a name for that tiger and that lamb? My dog, sorry. Think about that for just a second. I'm going to mute myself while you. Okay. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about this story and about what you thought about it, what you think about it. Why do you think the animals excuse the tiger's nature, yet try to make the lamb adapt?
Because the tiger's more assertive and the lamb is more complacent.
It's always been done that way.
And by the way, there are no right answers to this. I just want to remind you, this is our playfulness together as we talk through some important things. Anything
They don't
else?
have a problem with the tiger, so it must be trivial, her problem with the tiger.
I think discerning which one is supposedly the victim, sometimes the victim is blamed for giving off, those vibes, and that's what's causing the problem.
I found it interesting the number of times it was repeated that the tiger is just a tiger, but nobody acknowledged a sheep is just a sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do we tend to stand up for the more aggressive, the more outspoken people?
They certainly stand up for themselves. Do you think they would ever ask the tiger to leave the forest?
No, because he's not hurting anybody.
I think I would have to respond to that with another story of the axe was running for leadership position in the forest, and all of the trees kept voting for the axe because it was made out of wood and like them, as opposed to the chainsaw that was not. The forest would see that the tiger fits in and the sheep fits less.
So if the tiger were to eat the lamb, whose fault would it be?
The tigers.
Why?
Because he did the eating.
He was told the rules when he moved in. And he agreed to it.
Why wouldn't it also be the other animals, because they encourage the lamb to get closer to the tiger and reconcile?
Rarely does a group recognize the group's failings. It places instead the blame on an individual. Yet at the same time, the response would be then fear from the others because that aggression had stepped up to a different level.
So is the tiger inherently evil or just doing what comes naturally?
Does that have to be an either or?
Maybe let me hear the cases.
Doing what comes naturally. Some of us talk more and are more outgoing or more aggressive than others, and just are.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think it's the tiger's nature and just doing what a tiger does.
Go ahead.
Elton, you're muted.
I think he's showing pretty great restraint in not eating the lamb.
I agree with that. I find this a little difficult story in a sense of relating it, thinking about people because, animals have a nature and then, I see people as quite different. So I kind of hesitated to answer some questions because I wasn't sure in what direction we're trying to come from. So maybe that's just me. Maybe that's my nature.
Elton?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I just didn't see anywhere where the other animals were trying to pacify the lion and trying to make him understand. Did you see that in the story, or did you hear that in the story? I might have missed it.
That's true. They kept trying to change the lamb and never really confronted the tiger. Yeah.
Yeah, the tiger was
allowed to continue to be
well,
the
he's
tiger.
just being a tiger,
Yeah, well, I mean, is any behavior short of actually killing the other animals, is all of it permissible?
No, we should always be kind.
But that wasn't in their contract.
Should have been.
So in what way could the tiger be seen as the symptomatic member of a family, like the person that you kind of tiptoe around in a family? Perhaps the one who is the identified patient. A lot of our families have that. Somebody who is in our family who is kind of the problem child, or the one who is identified as the difficult one. Maybe the parents had to spend more time on them. Maybe they didn't get as good of grades in school. They may have drug or alcohol things like, issues that they deal with, other kinds of ways that the family identifies them as the problem child. We all kind of know that. We see that in our own families. We see that in other people's families sometimes, where that is going on. So if we think about this tiger, as something that's just allowed to freely roam and do whatever tigers want to do, short of killing, that's the only restriction to them. How is that like what we do in our families sometimes?
Mhm.
Have you seen that before somewhere?
I have an older brother who's a bully, and everybody just kind of walks around it and just, it's, well, just accept it. Just that's how he is. And you just deal with that.
Well, there's some people that, sort of are know-it-alls. And is it, I think when I approach something like that, I think, well, it's not going to make a difference what I say to them. So you just sort of live with it, and you're not going to change them. And so you just kind of walk around it or work around it.
What about in churches? No names, of course. Stories are fine. Case studies, we call them, helping us work things out. It's a good question, isn't it? When we think about, the people who act, we allow them to come in, and the only thing we expect out of them is just don't kill the other people. And that's kind of like our very low threshold to joining and being a part of us. And they may come in and cause a great deal of havoc, and we don't really deal all that much with it. You may be thinking of something right now, a situation that you've experienced before, where someone, was behaving badly. It was not up to community standards, but nobody wanted to deal with it. Everybody kind of walked around.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I've been accused of being brutally honest. but I try to do it in a kind but honest way, and have confronted even a minister a couple times with things that I thought were inappropriate, and just honestly said, I think what you said about X, Y, or Z is inappropriate coming from the pulpit. And I personally wish you wouldn't go down that road.
Was there someone else who was going to speak?
I was trying to say I would share two anecdotes quickly. Serving in a church where it had a retired pastor who consistently badmouthed one of the worship services to other people. And then when I would confront him on it, said, I'm just trying to do what's best for the church, but not seeing that they weren't the appointed pastor, and that trying to imitate something else somewhere else wasn't where we're trying to take the church. And then another, and I'll reference another book by way of introduction. The book is titled Clergy Killers. And the people that demand that things have to be done their way and will just perpetually work at antagonizing the clergy by not quite doing exactly what was asked or what's needed.
Yeah, it can be difficult.
Mhm.
I know we all experience it in different ways because it's a family system, because we are related to each other. We are in a dynamic. So talking about the lion again, should the intrusive party, the lion, have equal rights?
I think everyone should have equal rights.
Does he not need to have boundaries? You know, you set boundaries for the sheep. We have to have boundaries for the aggressors.
With equal rights becomes equal responsibilities.
Good point.
I just say it wouldn't be equal rights if everybody didn't have it. And that doesn't eliminate the need for, rules. I think the rule where the lion wouldn't kill or eat anybody was certainly a good rule to have. And everybody following that, the lamb should have felt more. Even though I understand it's tough when you see somebody, certainly the nature of a tiger, is to kill. And if you're the one that's being killed, then, it takes a lot for that person to change and understand. Seems like that story needed to be more, I think somebody said it, more communication with the tiger. It seemed like it was all about the lamb.
Well, one thing we haven't actually identified yet is that the lion is told that he's not allowed to kill, but what about just a little bite or a swipe? Right?
I
That's
think
okay, apparently.
I sometimes am a bit more confrontational in addressing some of the people in the congregation, both before going into ministry and since. And I'm reminded of what I was taught in school years ago, is that your rights end where my rights begin. And if they're truly equal, then we find a mutual boundary. And no, you can't bite me.
Well, like we often hear in churches too, it's not only biting and physical, but it's roaring.
Yeah.
I mean,
Intimidation.
a small lamb and a large lion or large tiger, no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The tiger needs to eat also. Has the right to have a meal. But that's where you get into where your right, my rights end where your rights begin. Where how
So let's think about this tiger as an uncompromising force. The tiger is going to be a tiger, and that's what he is. Nobody has called him on that at all. So the tiger is an uncompromising force. So are peace and progress ever compatible when dealing with uncompromising forces like the tiger? Peace and progress compatible?
Not if you have forces that cannot, communicate. Then I don't see it happening. I mean, we see that in the world all the time. Palestinians, Israelis, conflicts. I mean, and if you can't come to agreements, then certainly there's no peace. By the way, this reminded me of the Lion King, sort of. I saw this at the play at the U of A here last year, and it was wonderful. But the whole story about the Lion King was interesting because, the lion, made friends with other animals that he would normally eat. And, the other lions looked at that and thought that was crazy, but so it was possible to occur, but he had to go through a lot to get to that point. So anyway, I saw some analogy to that story a little bit.
I guess I would just add peace and progress. There's different levels of peace and there's different levels of progress. So can peace and progress happen at the same time? Yes, if, there's probably sacrifice on different pieces or levels of peace and levels of progress.
But we're talking about one force who will not give in, will not sacrifice. Is peace and progress possible?
Wouldn't it depend on what others were able to do, not just what that one can do?
How do we know he's not willing to compromise? Nobody's asked him.
We don't know what other animals were involved in this confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
I hear the church people in you coming out right now, by the way, the consensus model, preferring that. I hear that. I mean, I understand, because that's what we prefer to do, because we don't want to say that there's a time where, what I love about the United Methodist Church, one of the things we say about justice and peace is that there can't be peace without justice. And that's like a thing that kind of goes over and over again in my mind. Whenever we talk about peace, there cannot be peace without justice. Justice is hard. Justice doesn't allow to settle for, something that's not quite right. Justice is progress that's required. And so there's we're Methodists, and that's kind of our drumbeat, is that there can't be peace without justice when we think about these two things together. And it's hard because in our churches, that is difficult. And our meetings, our groups and meetings that meet together, because consensus is a lot easier. In other words, we all kind of come to the same agreement. We all are of the same mind. And I remember in a few different times actually in my life, I've been told that consensus actually is, we're not really all of the same mind. We all are saying that we're of the same mind, but there's usually at least somebody who's kind of holding out a little bit and says, if this doesn't fit the way I like it to, I'm going to cause a problem with it. I'm not going to go along with it later. So consensus isn't really a thing. And it's an interesting, because we really do want to just go by consensus. It shows that we're good people. We're kind to each other. We're getting along well. So a follow-up question to that. In what way does a consensus orientation give strength to extremists?
Mm.
What does that look like?
It allows bad behavior. Because you're trying to work together and you're saying, well, I'll ignore this and whatever, as opposed to mutually both sides having to come together and be fair and respect each other's boundaries. Consensus is more of a compromise. You give up this to get that. So
The loudest person often wins.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen this happen before someplace? Where consensus, where maybe an extremist was able to rise in your church or your family because of more of a consensus model of, kind of getting along, maybe going out to dinner and everybody is trying to figure out what you're going to eat. But there's that one person who really, really complains about it. They want to go to their place, even though everybody else is going to go to this other place already. And have you seen that that happen around you somewhere?
mm-hmm.
Are there any
But
examples?
You only let it happen a few times, I think, I mean, if you keep letting it happen and keep letting it happen, then there's going to be a problem. But to do it once or twice, I guess is kind of okay for consensus, for the peace.
I like the metaphor that was used in the story, is that the sheep wanted to leave, and what happens in the church is that the sheep do leave, and you're left with a bag full of tigers, and they can't reach consensus on which one of them is going to allow the others to eat them.
Or the other to be the leader.
All right, I'd like to have you think for a moment now from the perspective of the lamb, that you are the lamb in this situation. How do you establish criteria in order to know when not to escalate and when to say, I've had enough?
I think he basically said he had enough. He said he was leaving.
What do you think it was that brought him to that point?
His own timidness, his own being afraid to speak up, his own not saying what he needed.
Well, when the other animals were asking him to, asking the sheep or lamb to constantly, acquiesce, be a good word.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to that statement about peace. Peace isn't just the cessation of violence, but when the sheep's sense of security and stuff was infringed upon and no longer had internal peace, that's when it spoke up and said, I've had enough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
when you're in a dangerous situation, sometimes you just have to be honest with yourself. And it's hard, because maybe you really like everyone else in the forest and in the church, but you have to be honest with yourself, and you can only, your psyche, your mental health, it can only take so much, and you just have to take care of yourself.
Yeah, I hear that in life, sometimes you just have to stand up and say, well, this is what I have to do. And that's what I saw the Lamb kind of doing in order to feel comfortable about he or she, I guess, was not getting the, felt like what his concerns were being considered properly by the other animals. So, he kind of had to say, well, what's more important to me? And my life is, so, got to go.
Do you all feel pretty good about knowing when something has overstepped the bounds for you?
No, I don't, because I find that, I have this feeling of wanting to persevere and stay, not give up. And so that's sort of what it takes sometimes. I think when I should just say, okay, no, it's time to let that go.
Yeah.
So that's tough for me.
Mm-hmm. I see a lot of nodding heads. Yeah.
Biggest thing I've seen with especially in church applications, when people feel that they are essentially being voted out, or the congregation is not with them, and for their own peace of mind, they need to move on.
The lesson I took from this is we need to be better at standing up for the weaker one in groups.
I think both Anita and Michael have hit on points there that as long as the others weren't feeling threatened, it was okay that the sheep was, but if the sheep were then eliminated, who would be the next one threatened? And we've seen that so many times. And Anita's point of speaking up for those that are least capable of speaking for themselves or the most vulnerable is an important role for us to take on.
Mhm.
Well, how often have we had someone come to us and, confide to us that, they've had this behavior happening from another person, and we just try and placate that and say, that's who that is. You just kind of have to, go with it. And I don't know that we actually think of what even mental harm that's doing to what I call the victim. And, so I think we need to look deeper into that and not just say, well, that's who that person is. You just have to live with it,
And really, I'll point back to family systems theory on dealing with this, because to really be able to understand when to deal with something and confront something, and when to keep healthy relationships with both parties, which is one of the non-anxious leader tools that we have of self-differentiation. It's really helpful to go back through your own stuff, because one of the questions I think about in this is, who are you? Are you a lamb or are you a lion in this? Because where we came from in our family, or maybe you identify as one of the other forest animals who's out there, or maybe you identify as that one animal who's uncouth and who says what he thinks. And he says, why wouldn't you cage that animal? Everybody cages a tiger. Duh, at the end. thinking of who you are is a part of our family systems theory and how we identify with problems like this, because we may see ourselves as kind of a tiger. We have more of that, that kind of feeling. We're willing to stand up for ourselves. We are a tiger. I am a tiger. I'm unapologetic about that. And we go in, or we may see ourselves or feel and experience more like a lamb, that we are kind of afraid to call somebody else out on something. We're afraid to set boundaries for ourselves that are healthy. We may feel like those animals who are there, who are like, I don't want to cause a problem. We just got this tiger and we want to be a cool forest. We want both animals here. Why can't we all just get along, and figure it out? And so, we will find ourselves in that place somehow, and how we address those kinds of issues, Jeannie, that you mentioned, when someone brings something up, often has to do with where we've come from and our own family system that we've come from. So doing some of this work and continuing to kind of puzzle through these things, and being playful about it. And, it's deep work. This is not something that, we rush into, but this is important, deep work that we continue to do. And I have one more question for you on this one. So I want you to think about this. I mentioned the word evil before, and we can think about this in terms of anything that's bad, any power or principality. So to what extent is evil, or any disease, or any system that's in place, an independent force, something of its own being, and to what extent are destructive effects the result of the system failure itself? So when we think about this, is it the lion or the tiger that's the problem, or is it the system itself that allowed the tiger to be a problem?
I'm going to play devil's advocate. I'm not sure there really is a problem. The tiger hasn't hurt anybody, hasn't done anything. Does the lamb just need to stand up for itself and learn to be more, aggressive maybe is too strong a word. I think we all need to learn to be better advocates for ourselves, take care of ourselves.
I think the lamb did stand up for itself, but it's not in the lamb's nature, just like it's not in the tiger's nature either.
So what's the old saying? You can't change the tiger's stripes.
So I'll ask this question again. What extent is this the tiger acting in a way that is not safe, is a bad way of acting? And to what extent is this the system allowing the tiger to act in a bad way? Where do you see more of the blame?
I think the system. I mean, when they laid out the ground rules for the tiger, they didn't think through all of them. And then when he started being a tiger and scaring the lamb, they just ignored it instead of saying, okay, team meeting, this isn't working for all of us, and setting some healthier boundaries. So I think the group had a lot to do with it.
Mhm.
The system.
Nobody wants one more meeting.
True.
It's easier to ignore it, right?
It
So
is easier to ignore it, and if we ignore it, it's going to go away. It'll resolve itself if we just wait a little longer.
Mm.
Mm.
And sometimes things do.
But usually they don't. Well, often they do. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
When you're dealing with a tiger,
No.
it probably won't.
No.
It will right after the lamb is eaten.
Yep, and
Yeah.
like somebody
define
said,
resolve.
then who's next? Somebody's going to be next.
So how
And
do
that's
you?
the
Go ahead, Carl.
I would say that's the point at which the system recognizes that it has to establish some other boundaries. And the way you originally asked the question, the answer is yes, because both the tiger and the system are at fault. Both have to be adjusted. And we might say that confining the tiger might be adequate, but the tiger still needs to eat. And so then at what point does the system then say, what sacrifices are we willing to make in order to nurture and keep that tiger alive?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Again, I want to say, and I don't want to belabor the point, but it's a serious point for me, and that is that, this story is about animals that have a tiger, a lion is a lion, and they have a nature about them. And then when I relate that to humans, United Methodists or any other denomination, that our nature is what we fight against all the time anyway. Our nature is, we don't want to get too much into it. We would go back into Genesis and, the Adam and Eve and sin nature. So we're trying to move out of that anyway. So seeing all of us as somewhat flawed, then meeting, it should be easier for us. Unfortunately, obviously it isn't. Our churches we wouldn't be talking about this kind of stuff. But to see us try to bring everybody into the fold and say, okay, we're not there yet, even clergy and lay people, and saying, okay, but we're striving to be more like Christ. So we can get there, but we have to appreciate all of us, even the differences, and say, okay, I might not agree with something that somebody here said, or sometimes I don't even agree what I say, but it's, so there's a difference there. The difference is, Christ.
We're going on to perfection. That does not mean that we have achieved that. That's for sure. We are continuing to endeavor in that. I one of the other things that I work alongside of family systems theory is the Enneagram. And for me, that's really helpful because it's kind of the things that flow in our lives that, much like the Grand Canyon, the water comes to the Grand Canyon, and over time, it's created this enormous Grand Canyon, right? Sometimes the water would come to a rock and the water would go around the rock. Sometimes it would go over the rock. Sometimes it goes straight through that rock, right? Sometimes it would move the rock. And the Enneagram is one of the ways, an ancient tradition of ways that we learn kind of our types, and if you will, Richard Rohr calls it our angels and demons, and the ways that we interact with each other. And so I use that hand in hand with family systems theory because there's kind of a rhythm to how we all work, and some of us are more like tigers in our nature and how we approach the world, because we're gonna get to that rock and we're gonna go right through it, right? Or we're gonna move that rock altogether. And I always say that we can really see Jesus working in people and the Holy Spirit moving in people when they want to go through that rock. And for a moment, they take a pause before they do, and they listen to God. But, it's still how we're, it's kind of how we're wired. That's one of the things that we have to be aware of in ourselves when we come to things like this. So I want to ask the question, given all of that, how do you feel when the only reasonable resolution to the problem is we have to stop the tiger?
I'd recruit a lion. Come into the group. To even things up a little bit.
Find him a mate so he's got other things.
Yeah. Tell him what to do.
Yeah, the tiger's not being challenged by anything, that's more of a predator.
How do we feel when the only reasonable resolution is we have to stop the tiger?
Then you stop the tiger. And be okay with it.
Are you willing to try?
Yes.
Is there
So
any
just
reason? Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, Jeannie.
No, is there any reasoning with the tiger? I mean, I have seen situations where it's sort of like 1, 2, 3, and the third strike, you're out, right? I mean, so they give them 3 different chances. Do we work with the tiger and see if, perhaps we could get him to, look in, just be in another part of the forest and not antagonize the sheep, which is what he's doing. So I don't know.
The sheep did say that the lamb did say that they thought about all of this and they realized that they would be asked to compromise too if they brought this up. Like if there was something the tiger was going to ask to maybe growl less, but the lamb would have to accept the growling more. And the lamb didn't think that was acceptable.
But why shouldn't both sides give a little? Why should only the tiger have to give if the lamb doesn't have to change at all?
Is the lamb doing anything to offend the tiger?
I think so.
Don't have the mind of a tiger. How do we know what he's thinking?
It's not allowing itself to be eaten. That probably offends the tiger.
Another metaphor that keeps running through my mind as we're having this discussion, and I'll phrase it out as another question. So how much cancer would you like us to remove from you?
It can be a cancer. Yeah, it can be.
So, this story, this conversation that we're having is a very real one. And as you've all said, you've all seen this someplace. You've all experienced it in one way or another, in family or in your churches or in your relationships. And Edwin Friedman, who wrote this book, he developed many of his thoughts through the study of families and congregations. And he said that oftentimes groups are faced with a choice between trying to keep everyone happy and doing justice. Everyone cannot always be kept happy. Most people can be content with justice. So that's something to think about when we think about this story.
Say that again. Great.
So, groups are often faced with a choice between trying to keep everyone happy and doing justice. Everyone cannot always be kept happy. Most people can be content with justice.
So the tiger thought it was justice to take the lamb. Is that what I'm hearing? Everybody has their own idea of what is justice.
I think in this case, what we're talking about is that giving the tiger parameters to stay within, or caging the tiger even, as was pointed out, would be a reasonable, just measure to make sure that the lamb was not harmed. The group was afraid to do anything about that. The fact that they know a tiger is a tiger and tigers are going to eat lamb. They're going to swipe lamb. They're going to growl at lamb. We're not always willing in our churches to do the obvious thing because we want to keep peace.
Mm-hmm.
Is one of the thoughts here.
Yeah.
We want to come up with a different solution. We want to come up with something that will keep everybody happy so everybody feels good about it all. But sometimes there are situations where there is something that is immobile, that will not be, that can't be moved. There's no other way around it.
in life, there's probably actually a lot of situations where you can't please everybody all the time. It's not possible. I mean, Jesus couldn't please everybody, and he was pretty perfect.
So what does the justice of this look like? If you can't keep everybody happy, what does the justice look like? Is it merely fairness that the lamb and the tiger have to, and the system and everybody else in the forest has to do something together so that everybody's got, you know, something involved in it? Is that the justice?
What do y'all think?
We still haven't seen the lamb and the tiger sit down together and even talk about it.
The lamb said they were not willing to do that because they knew what the outcome would be.
But how do you know if you don't try it?
The lamb had that was one of the boundaries the lamb had, is that they were not going to, they said, for my own self-care, that's not safe for me to sit down and to compromise with the tiger. If you were a lamb, would you want to sit down with a tiger?
See, that's that part of being honest with yourself as to, you know, your mental health and your health in general. Yeah.
Right.
And if you were the tiger, would you want to sit down with a lamb, knowing that you might be tempted?
No, and I think that's like what you said. The justice is more, well, then, you know, maybe the tiger needs to be caged for now, because, and I think maybe the lamb could come around at some point if they were more assured that this tiger was changing what his nature usually is, and that's not an easy thing. But justice is okay. We need to listen to the lamb, see what the lamb needs to feel more comfortable in this situation, and have them talk. Right now, the lamb doesn't want to talk because, like, no, this tiger's going to eat me. But that doesn't mean that you can't get to that point. So that's what justice looks like to me. Is some middle ground right there. The tiger's not going to be happy about being caged, but look, we need to do this because the lamb, you know, here's your nature, here's the truth. Your nature's like this. The lamb is not trusting of that. So let's put you in a cage right now and we'll work towards, you know, a better outcome.
But then you have to feed him.
Yeah. Well, I'll go back to the Lion King. He ate those little grubs or things or whatever it is. Make him a vegetarian.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that they point out in this, I think that's a good reminder, is they all know who and what this tiger is. Like they all know what a tiger does. They all know that tigers eat lamb. So there's not a big surprise to them. It's not like they aren't aware of that, or there's some surprise about what a tiger is like or anything like that, because there's that one animal who points out the obvious, the one who's willing to say what nobody else is willing to say. We caged the tiger, you know, the obvious thing. So, you know, that's the thing to kind of go back on in this is this was not a big surprise to these animals. They all knew it. They knew what they were dealing with.
Well, what's so interesting about that is he also eats other animals too. So, like you said,
just a matter of time and hunger. Right?
That's right.
Well, friends, I actually did have some more stories, but we did such a good job of sharing and playing together on these questions. I'm not going to go through any more stories for us because you do a really good job of this. what I do want to say is that as a leader, one of the things that we can become prone to is getting overly serious. And when we become too serious about things, especially, and this happens when our anxiety rises, like if we were the lamb and all of a sudden the tiger is coming by us, we would get very, very, very serious very quickly. Or like with the other animals, when they hear this first about, the lamb's concern about this, they could get very serious about it. And when we get very serious in leadership, especially about things that are have a lot of anxiety, things that kind of rise our own personal anxiety or things that we've been in before, we don't make the best decisions. A lot of times it's our anxiety that's making the decision and not what really needs to happen in that situation, the content of what's going on. And so one of the strategies that you can use in life, generally, this is a wonderful, I use this a lot, is that sometimes we need to just be 1% different. 1% more playful in a serious situation. 1% more joyful in a super sad situation. Just a little bit of a change so that we can change the dynamic of whatever the system that we're in. And I think about that with the lamb. If the lamb had been a little bit playful in this, at one point, it might have gotten the animals to go, well, aren't all of you afraid of being eaten? And they all would be like, you're right, we hadn't thought about that, and it may have changed the entire dynamic for the animals to be able to make the difference. So sometimes a little bit of playfulness in super serious situations can be very helpful to lighten up the mood a little bit, to help us go through something difficult. And so, when you find yourself in that difficult situation with a family member or with another church member or with a pastor or with someone else, a friend or something like that, think about how you can be just a little less serious in those situations, because it can mean the difference between being able to find a way forward or being stuck in the same routine that you've been doing. So can I pray for us as we get ready to go on our own journeys?
Thank you.
God, we thank you for this evening that we've had together and for this wonderful, playful work of working through a story, of listening to our thoughts and listening to each other deeply, of doing the important work of being the people of God together. And God, we're thankful for stories like this that remind us, these fables that remind us of who we are and how we operate in the world. God, help us to listen to you in what we've heard tonight and what we've thought about, and help us to learn from it and which direction you might be leading us during this time. God, we're thankful for this playfulness. We're thankful for leaders who are willing to continue working on themselves and understanding who they are so that they can be your people. For all of this, we thank you, God, and in Jesus Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Very
I'd like to turn this over to Pastor Carl to close us out. Have you got the finishing of the whole script?
I hope that I have been able to join to be able to do this. Pastor Kristen, thank you so much for your presentation this evening. I know that I really enjoyed both your presentation and the conversation about it. You reminded me of this book that I got introduced to at Family Systems Theory and have frankly forgotten about. And I ordered a replacement copy and it arrived in the mail. We got back late from Tucson and I asked my wife to go out and check the mail while we were already in the conversation. But this is, I think, really helpful, and I hope everybody else has enjoyed it as much as I have. I think somebody is taking care of putting the link for our next presentation, which will be coming up on March 13th. It's going to be titled Start With Why, How Great Leaders Inspire Everyone to Take Action. Cherie Hull will be our presenter that evening, and I'm looking forward to it as well. Oftentimes, I don't get to see these on Monday evenings, and I understand everybody else had difficulties with Zoom this evening. We can hope that they don't have a new update just before we're trying to log in next month. And I don't know, Kristen, if it is snowing up in your area, but between Tucson and Sierra Vista, there has been a bit of snow, and it slowed us down getting in from Tucson this evening.
Wow.
So with that, I think that wraps us up, and I look forward to seeing everybody next month.